The Urantia Book, Part 4, The Life and Teachings of Jesus, Paper 124, The Later Childhood of Jesus. Although Jesus might have enjoyed a better opportunity for schooling at Alexandria than in Galilee, he could not have had such a splendid environment for working out his own life problems with a minimum of educational guidance, at the same time enjoying the great advantage of constantly contacting with such a large number of all classes of men and women, hailing from every part of the civilized world. Had he remained at Alexandria, his education would have been directed by Jews and along exclusively Jewish lines. At Nazareth, he secured an education and received a training which more acceptably prepared him to understand the Gentiles and which gave him a better and more balanced idea of the relative merits of the Eastern or Babylonian and the Western or Hellenic views of Hebrew theology. 1. Jesus' ninth year, A.D. 3rd. Though it could hardly be said that Jesus was ever seriously ill, he did have some of the minor ailments of childhood this year, along with his brothers and baby sister. School went on, and he was still a favorite pupil, having 1 week each month at liberty, and he continued to divide his time about equally between trips to neighboring cities with his father, sojourns on his uncle's farm south of Nazareth, and fishing excursions out from Magdala. The most serious trouble as yet to come up at school occurred in late winter, when Jesus dared to challenge the Charsam, reading the teaching that all images, pictures, and drawings were idolatrous in nature. Jesus delighted in drawing landscapes as well as in modeling a great variety of objects in potter's clay. Everything of that sort was strictly forbidden by Jewish law, but up to this time he had managed to disarm his parents' objection to such an extent that they had permitted him to continue in these activities. Well, his parents were not 100% Jews, so that was a saving grace for him. But trouble was again stirred up at school when one of the more backward pupils discovered Jesus drawing a charcoal picture of the teacher on the floor of the schoolroom. There it was, plain as day, and many of the elders had viewed it before the committee went to call on Joseph to demand that something be done to suppress the lawlessness of his eldest son. You can see and hear how rigid the Jews were at these times, especially the ones who were by the letter, and this hasn't changed at all because they still exist and they are still those whom are strict by the law and thus by the letter. These Jews are still existing. And I do not want to say all the Jews are like that, but there's still this group of Jews that is still living by the letter. And though this was not the first time complaints had come to Joseph and Mary about the doings of their versatile and aggressive child, this was the most serious of all the accusations which had thus far been lodged against him. So, actually, you can say that the teacher tried to box Jesus in a way as they seemed fit that he had to be in, and they did everything to undo him from creativity. Well, look at today's life. Aren't we right now in this time frame where everything is being done to rip the human race from every type of creativity, which started in the which starts in the educational system? The whole educational system that is demanding of the children to be something that they are not. So this hasn't changed. This was the most serious of all the accusations which had thus far been lodged against him. Jesus listened to the indictment of his artistic efforts for some time, being seated on a large stone just outside the back door. He resented their blaming his father for his alleged misdeeds, so in he marched fearlessly, confronting his accusers. The elders were thrown into confusion. Some were inclined to view the episode humorously, while one or two seemed to think the boy was sacrilegious, if not blasphemous. Joseph was nonplussed, Mary indignant, but Jesus insisted on being heard. He had his say. Sorry, that's the type of letters that is not reading pleasant. He had his say, courageously defend his viewpoint, and with consummate self-control announced that he would abide by the decision of his father in this as in all other matters controversial. And the committee of elders departed in silence. Wow. So that was Jesus. When he was 9 years old, he had already the courage, to confront these people in a way that they listened to him. So this was all training for later ministry. Mary endeavored to influence Joseph to permit Jesus to model in clay at home, provided he promised not to carry on any of these questionable activities at school. But Joseph felt impelled to rule that the rabbinical interpretation of the second commandment should prevail, and so Jesus no more drew or modeled the likeness of anything from that day as long as he lived in his father's house. So as long as he lived in his father's house, he stopped drawing and modeling. So actually you can say he was setting aside his creative abilities. But he was unconvinced of the wrong of what he had done, and to give up such a favorite pastime constituted one of the great trials of his young life. In the latter part June, Jesus, in company with his father, first climbed to the summit of Mount Tabor. Well, I truly believe that Jesus later on, as soon as he left the house, he probably was doing some sort of creativity, because creativity is part of being an being. Creativity is part of life. If there were no creativity, then it would be a very boring world. And better said, look at ourselves. We are the creative expression of the Universal Father Himself. So, the creation of an animal is a creative expression of the Universal Father Himself. So, creativity is part of the process. In the latter part of June, Jesus, in company with his father, first climbed to the summit of Mount Tabor. It was a clear day, and the view was superb. It seemed to this 9-year-old lad that he had really gazed upon the entire world, excepting India, Africa, and Rome. Jesus' second sister, Martha, was born Thursday night, September 13th, AD 3. 3 weeks after the coming of Martha, Joseph, who was home for a while, started the building of an addition to their house, a combined workshop and bedroom. A small workbench was built for Jesus, and for the first time he possessed tools of his own. At odd times, for many years, he worked at this bench and became highly expert in the making of yokes. This winter and the next were the coldest in Nazareth. For many decades, Jesus had seen snow on the mountains, and several times it had fallen in Nazareth, remaining on the ground only a short time, but not until this winter had he seen ice. The fact that water could be had as a solid, a liquid, and a vapor. He had long pondered over the escaping steam from the boiling pots, caused the lad to think a great deal about the physical world and its constitution, and yet the personality embodied in this growing youth was all this while the actual creator and organizer of all these things throughout a far-flung universe. The climate of Nazareth was not severe. January was the coldest month, the temperature averaging around 50 Fahrenheit. During July and August, the hottest months, the temperature would vary from 75 Fahrenheit to 90. Wow, that is around about 50 degrees Celsius. From the mountains to the Jordan and the Dead Sea Valley, the climate of Palestine ranged from the frigid to the torrid. And so, in a way, the Jews were prepared to live in about any and all of the world's varying climates. Even during the warmest summer months, a cool sea breeze usually blew from the west from 10 a.m. until about 10 p.m. But every now and then, terrific hot winds from the eastern desert would blow across all Palestine. These hot blasts usually came in February and March, near the end of the rainy season. In those days, the rain fell in refreshing showers from November to April, but it did not rain steadily. There were only two seasons in Palestine, summer and winter. The dry and rainy seasons. In January, the flowers began to bloom, and by the end of April, the whole land was one vast flower garden. In May of this year, on his uncle's farm, Jesus for the first time helped with the harvest of the grain. Before he was 13, he had managed to find out something about practically everything that men and women worked at around Nazareth except metal working. And he spent several months in a smith shop when older, after the death of his father, when work and caravan travel were slack. Jesus made many trips with his father on pleasure or business to nearby Cana, Endor, and Nain. Even as a lad, he frequently visited Sepphoris, only a little over 3 miles from Nazareth to the northwest, and from 4 BC to about AD 25, the capital of Galilee and one of the residences of Herod Antipas. Jesus continued to grow physically, intellectually, socially, and spiritually. His trips away from home did much to give him a better and more generous understanding of his own family, and by this time even his parents were beginning to learn from him as well as to teach him. Jesus was an original thinker and a skillful teacher. Even in his youth, he was in constant collision with the so-called oral law, but he always sought to adapt himself to the practices of his family. He got along fairly well with the children of his age, but he often grew discouraged with their slow-acting minds. Before he was 10 years old, he had become the leader of a group of 7 lads who formed themselves into a society for promoting the acquirements of manhood, physical, intellectual, and religious. Among these boys, Jesus succeeded in introducing many new games and various improved methods of physical recreation. 2. The 10th year. It was the 5th of July, the first Sabbath of the month, when Jesus, while strolling through the countryside with his father, first gave expression to feelings and ideas which indicated that he was becoming self-conscious of the unusual nature of his life mission. Joseph listened attentively to the momentous words of his son, but made few comments. He volunteered no information. The next day Jesus had a similar but longer talk with his mother Mary, likewise listened to the pronouncements of the lad, but neither did she volunteer any information. It was almost 2 years before Jesus spoke to his parents concerning this increasing revelation within his own consciousness regarding the nature of his personality and the character of his mission on earth. So by that time, you can say that the thought adjuster, the father fragment in him, was revealing more and more to him what he was about to do. He entered the advanced school of the synagogue in August. At school, he was constantly creating trouble by the questions he persisted in asking. Increasingly, he kept all Nazareth in more or less of a hubbub. His parents were loath to forbid his asking these disquieting questions, and his chief teacher was greatly intrigued by the lad's curiosity, insight, and hunger for knowledge. Jesus' playmates saw nothing supernatural in his conduct. In most ways, he was altogether like themselves. His interest in study was somewhat above the average, but not wholly unusual. He did ask more questions at school than others in his class. So, even in Jesus' time, there were people that had great difficulty with people questioning things. And even that is something that thankfully has never changed. And thankfully, I mean that there are still people in this world that dare to question things. Perhaps his most unusual and outstanding trait was his unwillingness to fight for his rights. Since he was such a well developed lad for his age, it seemed strange to his playfellows that he was disciplined to defend himself even from injustice, or when subjected to personal abuse, as it happened. He did not suffer much on account of this trait because of the friendship of Jacob, a neighbor boy who was 1 year older. He was the son of the stonemason, a business associate of Joseph. Jacob was a great admirer of Jesus and made it his business to see that no one was permitted to impose upon Jesus because of his aversion to physical combat. So he was not really. This tells us that Jesus wasn't a promoter of physical combat. Yeah, he was more a promoter of solving things in conversation and going in confrontation and solve it by words instead of by fighting over it. Several times, older and uncouth youths attacked Jesus, relying upon his reputed docility, but they always suffered swift and certain retribution at the hands of his self-appointed champion and ever-ready defender Jacob, the stonemason's son. So Jacob was more or less Jesus' bodyguard, so to speak, just in a natural sense. Jesus was the generally accepted leader of the Nazareth lads who stood for the higher ideals of their day and generation. He was really loved by his youthful associates, not only because he was fair, but also because he possessed a rare and understanding sympathy that betokened love and bordered on discreet compassion. This year he began to show a marked preference for the company of older persons. He delighted in talking over things cultural, educational, social, economic, political, and religious with older minds, and his depth of reasoning and keenness of observation so charmed his adult associates that they were always more than willing to visit him. So here you can see that he already had a group of, you can say, sort of disciples. Not really, but they were uh, the fore beginning of the later disciples. Until he became responsible for the support of the home. His parents were constantly seeking to influence him to associate with those of his own age, or more nearly his age, rather than with older and better informed individuals for whom he evinced such a preference. So, in that sense, his parents were not really understanding the path that Jesus had to walk. Because if you do your uttermost best as a parent to bring your child in connection with children of the same age, but not seeing that there is a reason for the fact that your son is far more interested in older people because of their background, their life story, and so on, they were not really stimulating their son Jesus in that matter. So in that way you can read, you can hear that they themselves didn't really understand the life mission of Jesus. Late this year, he had a fishing experience of 2 months with his uncle on the Sea of Galilee, and he was very successful. Before attaining manhood, he had become an expert fisherman. Well, that was not for a reason, of course, and that he was so good with fishing was also not for a reason. Fishing man. His physical development continued. He was an advanced and privileged pupil at school. He got along fairly well at home with his younger brothers and sisters, having the advantage of being 3.5 years older than the oldest of the other children. He was well thought of in Nazareth, except by the parents of some of the duller children, who often spoke of Jesus as being too pert, as lacking in proper humility and youthful reserve. He manifested a growing tendency to direct the play activities of his youthful associates into more serious and thoughtful channels. He was a born teacher and simply could not refrain from so functioning even when supposedly engaged in play. Joseph early began to instruct Jesus in the diverse means of gaining a livelihood, explaining the advantage of agriculture over industry and trade. Galilee was a more beautiful and prosperous district than Judea, and it cost only about 1/4 as much to live there as in Jerusalem and Judea. It was a province of agriculture and agricultural villages and thriving industrial cities, containing more than 200 towns of over 5,000 population and 30 over 15,000. When on his first trip with his father to observe the fishing industry on the Lake of Galilee, Jesus had just about made up his mind to become a fisherman. Sorry. So Jesus had just about made up his mind to become a fisherman, but close association with his father's vocation later on influenced him to become a carpenter, while still later a combination of influences led him to the final choice of becoming a religious teacher of a new order. Yeah, and that was the main thing in him. This teaching aspect was really the foundation. And the fishing and the carpeting was a side thing, and he learned skills there that he could use also in his teachings and later on when he started his service or ministry. 3. The 11th year, which is AD 5th. Throughout this year, the lad continued to make trips away from home with his father, but he also frequently visited his uncle's farm and occasionally went over to Magdala to engage in fishing with the uncle who made his headquarters near that city. Joseph and Mary were often tempted to show some special favoritism for Jesus, or otherwise to betray their knowledge that he was a child of promise, a son of destiny. But both of his parents were extraordinarily wise and sagacious in all these matters. The few times they did in any manner exhibit any preference for him, even in the slightest degree, the lad was quick to refuse all such special consideration. So this means he didn't want them to see him as special and to favoritize him. He didn't like that. He didn't want to be placed on a pedestal, better said. Jesus spent considerable time at the caravan supply shop, and by conversing with the travelers from all parts of the world, he acquired a store of information about international affairs that was amazing, considering his age. This was the last year in which he enjoyed much free play and youthful joyousness. From this time on, difficulties and responsibilities rapidly multiplied in the life of this youth. On Wednesday evening, June 24th, AD 5th, Jude was born. Complications attended the birth of this, the seventh child. Mary was so very ill for several weeks that Joseph remained at home. Jesus was very much occupied with errands for his father and with many duties occasioned by his mother's serious illness. Never again did this youth find it possible to return to the childlike attitude of his earlier years. From the time of his mother's illness, just before he was 11 years old, he was compelled to assume the responsibilities of the firstborn son, and to do all this 1 or 2 full years before these burdens should normally have fallen on his shoulders. The Chazan, a teacher, spent one evening each week with Jesus, helping him to master the Hebrew scriptures. He was greatly interested in the progress of his promising pupil. Therefore, was he willing to assist him in any ways, and in many ways. This Jewish pedagogue, exerted a great influence upon this growing mind, but he was never able to comprehend why Jesus was so indifferent to all his suggestions regarding the prospects of going to Jerusalem to continue his education under the learned rabbis. About the middle of May, the lad, Jesus, accompanied his father on a business trip to Scythopolis, the chief Greek city of Decapolis, the ancient Hebrew city of Beth Shan. On the way, Joseph recounted much of the olden history of King Saul, the Philistines, and the subsequent events of Israel's turbulent history. Jesus was tremendously impressed with the clean appearance and well ordered arrangement of this so called heathen city. He marveled at the open air theater and admired the beautiful marble temple dedicated to the worship of the so called heathen gods. Joseph was much perturbed by the lad's enthusiasm and sought to counteract these favorable impressions by extolling the beauty and grandeur of the Jewish temple at Jerusalem. Jesus had often gazed curiously upon this magnificent Greek city from the hill of Nazareth, and had many times inquired about its extensive public works and ornate buildings, but his father had always sought to avoid answering these questions. Now they were face to face with the beauties of this Gentile city, and Joseph could not gracefully ignore Jesus' inquiries. It so happened that just at this time the annual competitive games and public demonstrations of physical prowess between the Greek cities of the Decapolis were in progress at the Scythopolis amphitheater. And Jesus was insisted that his father take him to see the games, and he was so insisted that Joseph hesitated to deny him. The boy was thrilled with the games and entered most heartily into the spirit of the demonstrations of physical development and athletic skill. Joseph was inexpressibly shocked to observe his son's enthusiasm as he beheld these exhibitions of so-called heathen vaingloriousness. After the games were finished, Joseph received the surprise of his life when he heard Jesus express his approval of them and suggest that it would be good for the young men of Nazareth if they could be thus benefited by wholesome outdoor physical activities. Joseph talked earnestly and long with Jesus concerning the evil nature of such practices. But he well knew that the lad was unconvinced. So there you see, how people can stay stuck in ideas and beliefs spoon-fed by fellow brothers and sisters whom have such a strong belief in seeing many things as evil and many things are evil. So this is a clash. You can say that there's a clash between Jesus and his way of looking at the world, seeing the things happening in his world, and the the Father and the doctrine that his Father believed in, and the way his Father looked at things, and was his father and mother were quite influenced by the Jewish rules and law, and were very convinced that what was taught to them, that was the way you should approach things in life and so on. But Jesus, on the other hand, was a more open and was seeing the things from a different perspective. And you can say he was a new generation, but he also was showing his parents that you can change your opinion about things, and because others say that it is such doesn't mean that you have to believe it as such. So he learned his parents to to also start seeing the things from a different perspective, and having your own idea and opinion about it, and that is also okay. The only time Jesus ever saw his father angry with him was that night in their room at the inn, when, in the course of their discussions, the boy so far forgot the trends of Jewish thought as to suggest that they go back home and work for the building of an amphitheater at Nazareth. When Joseph heard his firstborn son express such an un-Jewish sentiments, he forgot his unusual calm demeanor, and seizing Jesus by the shoulder, angrily exclaimed, "My son, never again let me hear you give utterance to such an evil thought as long as you live." Jesus was startled by his father's display of emotion. He had never before been made to feel the personal sting of his father's indignation, and was astonished and shocked beyond expression. He only replied, "Very well, my father, it shall be so." And never again did the boy even in the slightest manner allude to the games and other athletic activities of the Greeks as long as his father lived. Later on, Jesus saw the Greek amphitheater at Jerusalem and learned how hateful such things were from the Jewish point of view. So here you see very clearly how the Jews themselves had created a deep hate against Gentiles and the things the Gentiles did. So actually you can see that Jesus started to see more and more the actual in-depth feeling in the Jews, which is hate. Because the Jews, and thus his own father and his own mother, who were very raised into Jewishism, and into the Jewish lifestyle, he saw this, and he was more a type of man, like, seeing things from a different perspective, He didn't saw directly evilness in things, but he started to see how the Jews had so many problems with the Gentiles by accepting them also. And this is still unto the day of today that um, there are still many Israelite people who can't come along with heathen or what is called Gentile people. And Jesus learned how hateful such things were from the Jewish point of view. Nevertheless, throughout his life, he endeavored to introduce the idea of wholesome recreation into his personal plans, and as far as Jewish practice would permit, into the later program of regular activities for his 12 apostles. At the end of this 11th year, Jesus was a vigorous, well developed, moderately humorous, and fairly light hearted youth, but from this year on he was more and more given to peculiar seasons of profound meditation and serious contemplation. He was much given to thinking about how he was to carry out his obligations to his family and at the same time be obedient to the call of his mission to the world. Already he had convinced that his ministry was not to be limited to the betterment of the Jewish people. Wow! He had already conceived that his ministry was not to be limited to the betterment of the Jewish people. So he knew that he was there for all the people in the world and not just for one specific people, one specific group of people. And that is the whole thing with the Jews. There are still too many Israelite people, which is known as Jews, who still think that that Jesus should be only there for them and not for the rest. Quite selfish, if I may say so. 4. The 12th year, which is AD 6th. This was an eventful year in Jesus' life. He continued to make progress at school and was indefatigably and he was not to defeat in his study of nature, while increasingly he prosecuted his study of the methods whereby men make a living. He began doing regular work in the home carpenter shop and was permitted to manage his own earnings, a very unusual arrangement to obtain in a Jewish family. So the funny thing is, if you hear all this and if I read all this, Jesus was actually helping his family to break out of these of that rigidness of the Jewish culture, but they didn't saw it as such. He was helping them to be more relaxed in their way of living and not to conform themselves too strictly to these rigid rules from Jewish life. This year, he also learned the wisdom of keeping such matters a secret in the family. He was becoming conscious of the way in which he had caused trouble in the village, and henceforth he became increasingly discreet in concealing everything which might cause him to be regarded as different from his fellows. Throughout this year he experienced many seasons of uncertainty, if not actual doubt regarding the nature of his mission. His naturally developing human mind did not yet fully grasp the reality of his dual nature. The fact that he had a single personality rendered it difficult for his consciousness to recognize the double origin of those factors which composed the nature associated with that self-same personality. From this time on, he became more successful in getting along with his brothers and sisters. He was increasingly tactful, always compassionate, and considerate of their welfare and happiness, and enjoyed good relations with them. Up to the beginning of his public ministry, to be more explicit, he got along with James, Miriam, and the two younger, as yet unborn children, Amos and Ruth. So that is funny. Amos is also a brother of Jesus. And there was a Ruth, probably named after the Ruth from the Bible. Because Ruth from the Bible, as I have mentioned in the times of Michael's bestowal on earth, there is a whole passage about the family line of Mary, and Ruth and Bathsheba were in her line. So, and there were many other very famous women in her line. So Amos, that's funny, is also a brother of brother or brother from Jesus. So by that time he was already, was it? Yeah, 12 years. So James, Miriam, Jude, because there is also a Jude. So Amos, Ruth, James, Jude, Miriam, Martha, because that was the seventh child. So that's interesting. So the Amos is then, the book of Amos is then written probably by Jesus' brother. Most excellently, he always got along with Martha very well. What trouble he had at home largely arose out of friction with Joseph and Jude, particularly the latter. Oh yeah, we have Joseph Jr., Jude, Amos, Ruth, Miriam, Martha, James, I miss then I miss one. It was a trying experience for Joseph and Mary to undertake the rearing of this unprecedented combination of divinity and humanity, and they deserve great credit for so faithfully and successfully discharging their parental responsibilities. Increasingly, Jesus' parents realized that there was something superhuman resident within this eldest son, but they never even faintly dreamed that this son of promise was indeed and in truth the actual creator of this local universe. Of things and beings. So they never dreamed that this son of promise was indeed and in truth the actual creator of this local universe of things and beings. Joseph and Mary lived and died without ever learning that their son Jesus really was the universe creator incarnated in mortal flesh. So was the universe creator incarnate in mortal flesh. That there's this year Jesus paid more attention than ever to music, and he continued to teach the home school for his brothers and sisters. It was at about this time that the lad became keenly conscious of the difference between the viewpoints of Joseph and Mary regarding the nature of his mission. He pondered much over his parents' differing opinions, often hearing their discussions when they thought he was sound asleep. More and more he inclined to the view of his father, so that his mother was destined to be hurt by the realization that her son was gradually rejecting her guidance in matters having to do with his life career. And as the years passed, this breach of understanding widened. Less and less did Mary comprehend the significance of Jesus' mission, and increasingly was this good mother hurt by the failure of her favorite son to fulfill her fond expectations. Joseph entertained a growing belief in the spiritual nature of Jesus' mission. And but for other and more important reasons, it does seem unfortunate that he could not have lived to see the fulfillment of his concept of Jesus' bestowal on earth. And so the father of Jesus, Joseph, was not thinking in the way as his wife did. Mary was strongly believing that her son was the Messiah of the Jews. But his father got more and more grown into the idea and concept and understanding that his eldest son would be there for everyone in the world, not just for a specific group of people, but for everyone. So his father was far more in the line of seeing his eldest son Jesus be actually the Redeemer for all people. So that is why Jesus could come along with the ideas and way of thinking and understanding of his father than his mother, because his mother was very into the strong belief that he would be there, the Messiah for the Jews. But his father saw that he would be probably the Messiah for all people. So that was the difference. That was actually the conflict between the parents and their eldest son Jesus. During his last year at school, when he was 12 years old, Jesus remonstrated with his father about the Jewish custom of touching the bit of parchment nailed upon the doorpost each time on going into or coming out of the house, and then kissing the finger that touched the parchment. That is the Ten Commandments on the doorpost. As a part of this ritual, it was customary to say, "The Lord shall preserve our going out and our coming in, From this time forth, and even forevermore, Joseph and Mary had repeatedly instructed Jesus as to the reasons for not making images or drawing pictures, explaining that such creations might be used for idolatrous purposes. Though Jesus failed fully to grasp their proscriptions against images and pictures, he possessed a high concept of consistency and therefore pointed out to his Father the essentially idolatrous nature of this habitual obeisance to the doorpost parchment. And Joseph removed the parchment after Jesus had thus remonstrated with him. So, yeah. And actually, if you see images and things as idolatrous, with everything it is, what is it you are doing with it, and with what purpose do you make an image, draw an image, do painting, uh, it's not what I say. Creativity is part of the life process. If creativity wasn't there, then it would be a very boring world. And creativity is part of the process of creation. Creation is intermingled with the principle of creativity. You have the principle of the female and the principle of the male and the principle of creativity. Without the principle of creativity, what type of world would we get? Well, unisex, everything looking the same. So creativity is part of this whole process of creation. As time passed, Jesus did much to modify their practice of religious forms, such as the family prayers and other customs. So what Jesus was actually doing in his family was showing them to step out of religion. His father was more, he better said, Jesus was seeing that his father was more easily to drawn out of religion, but mother was far more clinged into it. And so what Jesus was doing actually in his family was helping them to break them out of this rigidness of religion. There is, as a matter of fact, there is not something wrong with religion, but we forget that there are two streams of religion. A man-created religion, in which humanity themselves, have added all sorts of things to it that has nothing to do with true religion. And the Urantia book is eventually, that this will happen in later stages of the fourth part of this book from which I am reading to you. They will explain the difference between Jesus, his religion, and religion created and upheld by man, by humans themselves. The religion that we see in churches and so on, that is all man-made. That is all created by the way humanity thinks that religion has to be. Is all created by humanity, who thinks that you need this ritual, you need that ritual, and whatever ritual. Jesus, on the other hand, was seeing this and was like, this is not what true religion should look like. So he was helping his parents to get out of this rigid structure of this in their case, Jewish religion that was very by the letter. So that's beautiful to see this, and how he was helping them to see um, what they were actually doing. And it was possible to do many such things at Nazareth, for its synagogue was under the influence of a liberal school of rabbis, exemplified by the renowned Nazareth teacher Jose or Jose or Josie. Throughout this and the 2 following years, Jesus suffered great mental distress at, as the result of his constant effort to adjust his personal views of religious practices and social um, amenities to the established beliefs of his parents. So his parents were so, especially his mother, were so strict in the Jewish way of religion and Jewish religious way of life. He was distraught by the conflict between the urge to be loyal to his own convictions and the conscientious admonition of dutiful submission to his parents. His supreme conflict was between two great commands which were uppermost in his youthful mind. The one was, be loyal to the dictates of your highest convictions of truth and righteousness, and the other was, honor your father and mother, for they have given you life and the nurture thereof. However, he never shirked the responsibility of making the necessary daily adjustments between these realms of loyalty to one's personal convictions and duty toward one's family, and he achieved the satisfaction of effecting an increasingly harmonious blending of personal convictions and family obligations into a masterful concept of group solidarity based upon loyalty, fairness, tolerance, and love. Then 5, his 13th year, which is AD 7th. In this year, the lad of Nazareth passed from boyhood to the beginning of young manhood. His voice began to change, and other features of mind and body gave evidence of the oncoming status of manhood. On Sunday night, January 9th, AD 7, his baby brother Amos was born. Jude was not yet 2 years old. And the baby's sister Ruth. So on Sunday night, January 9th, AD 7, his baby brother Amos was born. Jude was not yet 2 years of age, and the baby sister Ruth was yet to come. So it may be seen that Jesus had a sizable family of small children left to his watch care when his father met his accidental death the following year. It was about the middle of February that Jesus became humanly assured that he was destined to perform a mission on earth for the enlightenment of man and the revelation of God. Momentous decisions coupled with far reaching plans were formulating the mind of this youth who was to outward appearances an average Jewish lad of Nazareth. The intelligent life of all Nebadon looked on with fascination and amazement as all this began to unfold in the thinking and acting of the now adolescent so-called carpenter's son. So the entire local universe of which Urantia is part of was in fascination and amazement about seeing the fulfillment that was taking place of the mission that Bestower Christ Michael was about to perform and set to do. On the first day of the week, March 20, AD 7, Jesus graduated from the course of training in the local school connected with the Nazareth synagogue. This was a great day in the life of any ambitious Jewish family, the day when the firstborn son was pronounced a son of the commandment and the ransomed firstborn of the Lord God of Israel, a child of the Most High and servant of the Lord of all the earth. Friday of the week before, Joseph had come over from Sepphoris, where he was in charge of the work on a new public building, to be present on this glad occasion. Jesus' teacher confidently believed that his alert and diligent pupil was destined to some outstanding career, some distinguished mission. The elders, notwithstanding all their trouble with Jesus' nonconformist tendencies, were very proud of the lad and had already begun laying plans which would enable him to go to Jerusalem to continue his education in the renowned Hebrew academies. As Jesus heard these plans discussed from time to time, he became increasingly sure that he would never go to Jerusalem to study with the rabbis, but he little dreamed of the tragedy so soon to occur, which would ensure the abandonment of all such plans by causing him to assume the responsibility for the support and direction of a large family, presently to consist of 5 brothers and 3 sisters. As well as his mother and himself. Jesus had a larger and longer experience rearing this family than was accorded to Joseph, his father, and he did measure up to the standard which he subsequently set for himself to become a wise, patient, understanding, and effective teacher and eldest brother to this family. His family, so suddenly sorrow-stricken and so unexpectedly bereft. The last 6 the last piece of this chapter. The journey to Jerusalem. Jesus, having now reached the threshold of young manhood and having been formally graduated from the synagogue schools, was qualified to proceed to Jerusalem with his parents to participate with them in the celebration of his first Passover. The Passover feast of this year fell on Saturday, April 9th, AD 7. A considerable company, 103, made ready to depart from Nazareth early Monday morning, April 4th, for Jerusalem. They journeyed southward toward Samaria, but on reaching Yesreel, they turned east, going around Mount Gilboa into the Jordan Valley in order to avoid passing through Samaria. In order to avoid passing through Samaria. That's where you can read already, and this is also in the Bible where it's stated that Jews were not allowed to speak with people from Samaria. Joseph and his family would have enjoyed going down through Samaria by way of Jacob's well and Bethel. But since the Jews disliked the deal with the Samaritans, they decided to go with their neighbors by way of the Jordan Valley. The much dreaded Archelaus had been deposed, and they had little to fear in taking Jesus to Jerusalem. 12 years had passed since the first Herod had sought to destroy the babe of Bethlehem, and no one would now think of associating that affair with this obscure lad of Nazareth. Before reaching the Yesreel junction, and as they journeyed on, very soon on the left they passed the ancient village of Shunem, and Jesus heard again about the most beautiful maiden of all Israel who once lived there, and also about the wonderful works Elisha performed there. In passing by Yesreel, Jesus' parents recounted the doings of Ahab and Jezebel and the exploits of Jehu. In passing around Mount Gilboa, they talked much about Saul, who took his life on the slopes of this mountain, King David, and the associations of this historic spot. As they rounded the base of Gilboa, the pilgrims could see the Greek city of Scythopolis on the right. They gazed upon the marble structures from a distance, but went not near the Gentile city, lest they so defile themselves that they could not participate in the forthcoming solemn and sacred ceremonies of the Passover at Jerusalem. So Mary could not understand why neither Joseph nor Jesus would speak of Scythopolis. She did not know about their controversy of the previous year, as they had never revealed this episode to her. The road now led immediately down into the tropical Jordan Valley, and soon Jesus was to have exposed to his wondering gaze the crooked and ever-winding Jordan with its glistening and rippling waters as it flowed down toward the Dead Sea. They laid aside their outer garments as they journeyed south in this tropical valley, enjoying the luxurious fields of grain and the beautiful oleanders laden with their pink blossoms, while massive snow-capped Mount Hermon stood far to the north. in majesty looking down on the historic valley. A little over 3 hours' travel from opposite Scythopolis, they came upon a bubbling spring, and here they camped for the night. Out under the starlit heavens, on their second day's journey, they passed by where the Jabbok, no, okay, they passed by where the Jabbok from the east flows into the Jordan, and looking east up this river valley, they recounted the days of Gideon when the Midianites poured into this region to overrun the land. Toward the end of the second day's journey, they camped near the base of the highest mountain overlooking the Jordan Valley, Mount Sartablah. Mount Sartabah, whose summit was occupied by the Alexandrian fortress where Herod had imprisoned one of his wives and buried his two strangled sons. The third day they passed by two villages which had been recently built by Herod, and noted their superior architecture and their beautiful palm gardens. By nightfall, they reached Jericho, where they remained until the morrow. That evening, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus walked 1.5 miles to the site of ancient Jericho, where Joshua, for whom Jesus was named, had performed his renowned of exploits according to Jewish tradition. By the fourth and last day's journey, the road was a continuous procession of pilgrims. They now began to climb the hills leading up to Jerusalem. As they neared the top, they could look across the Jordan to the mountains beyond and south over the sluggish waters of the Dead Sea. About halfway up to Jerusalem, Jesus gained his first view of the Mount of Olives, the region to be so much a part of his subsequent life. And Joseph pointed out to him that the holy city lay just beyond this ridge, and the lad's heart beat fast with joyous anticipation of soon beholding the city and house of his heavenly Father. On the eastern slopes of Olivet, they paused for rest in the borders of a little village called Bethany. The hospitable villagers poured forth to minister to the pilgrims, and it happened that Joseph and his family had stopped near the house of one Simon, who had 3 children about the same age as Jesus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. They invited the Nazareth family in for refreshment, and a lifelong friendship sprang up between the two families. Many times afterward in his eventful life, Jesus stopped in this home. They pressed on soon, standing on the brink of Olivet, and Jesus saw for the first time in his memory the holy city, the pretentious palaces, and the inspiring temple of his Father. At no time in his life did Jesus ever experience such a purely human thrill as that which at this time so completely enthralled hi- um, him as he stood there on this April afternoon on the Mount of Olives, drinking in his first view of Jerusalem. And in after years, on this same spot he stood and wept over the city which was about to reject another prophet. The last and the greatest of her heavenly teachers. So Jerusalem was eventually rejecting him, Jesus. But they hurried on to Jerusalem, or better said, the people, the Jews there. It was now Thursday afternoon. On reaching the city, they journeyed past the temple, and never had Jesus beheld such throngs of human beings. He meditated deeply on how these Jews had assembled here from the uttermost parts of the known world. Soon they reached the place prearranged for their accommodation during the Passover week, the large home of a well-to-do relative of Mary's, one who knew something of the early history of both John and Jesus. Through Zacharias, the following day, the day of preparation, they made ready for the appropriate celebration of the Passover Sabbath. While all Jerusalem was astir in preparation for the Passover, Joseph found time to take his son around to visit the academy where it had been arranged for him to resume his education 2 years later, as soon as he reached the required age of 15. Joseph was truly puzzled when he observed how little interest Jesus evinced in all these carefully laid plans. Jesus had no interest in these plans at all. Jesus was profoundly impressed by the temple and all the associated services and other activities. For the first time since he was 4 years old, he was too much preoccupied with his own meditations to ask many questions. He did, however, ask his father several embarrassing questions, as he had on previous occasions, as to why the Heavenly Father required the slaughter of so many innocent and helpless animals. Wow. So Jesus was really questioning this. And his father well knew from the expression on the lad's face that his answers and attempts at explanation were unsatisfactory to his deep thinking and keen reasoning son. On the day before the Passover Sabbath, flood tides of spiritual illumination swept through the mortal mind of Jesus and filled his human heart to overflowing with affectionate pity for the spiritually blind and morally ignorant multitudes assembled for the celebration of the ancient Passover commemoration. This was one of the most extraordinary days that the Son of God spent in the flesh And during the night, for the first time in his earth career, there appeared to him an assigned messenger from Selfington. And we know, or better said, in the book is being said, Michael is from Selfington, commissioned by Emmanuel, the Ancient of Days, of Union of Days, sorry. Emmanuel is the Union of Days that will later come when the Father seems fit to read that part of this book. That's part 2. Who said, "The hour has come. It is time that you began to be about your Father's business." The hour has come. It is time that you began to be about your Father's business. And Father's business is mentioned God the Father himself. And so even ere the heavy responsibilities of the Nazareth family descended upon his youthful shoulders, there now arrived the celestial messenger to remind this lad, not quite 13 years of age, that the hour had come to begin the resumption of the responsibilities of a universe. This was the first act of a long succession of events which finally culminated in the completion of the Son's bestowal, of Michael's bestowal on Urantia, Michael of Selfington, the Creator's Son of the Universal Father, and the replacing of the government of a universe on his human divine shoulders. As time passed, the mystery of the incarnation became to all of us more and more unfathomable. We could hardly comprehend that this lad of Nazareth was the creator of all Nebadon, this local universe that we are part of, that Urantia or Earth is part of. Neither do we nowadays understand how the spirit of this same Creator Son and the spirit of his Paradise Father are associated with the souls of mankind. With the passing of time, we could see that his human mind was increasingly discerning that, while he lived his life in the flesh, in spirit, on his shoulders rested the responsibility of a universe. Thus ends the career of the Nazareth lad and begins the narrative of that adolescent youth, the increasingly self-conscious divine human who now begins the contemplation of his world career as he strives to integrate his expanding life purpose with the desires of his parents and his obligations to his family and the society of his day and age. And with this, I have come to the end of reading paper 124. I truly hope that it gives you a better understanding of whom Jesus was till the age of 12 years. Paper 125 is explaining Jesus at Jerusalem and the start, actually the beginning of the next phase of his bestowal mission here on Urantia or Earth. Alright, thank you so much for listening, and God bless you. And again, I would say buy yourselves a copy of this Oransha book too and start reading it with an open mind. Have no beforehand conclusions or comments or judgments, but please read it with an open mind. Ask the Holy Spirit and the Spirit of truth to help you to understand what this book is trying to tell you and to teach you and to learn you. It is a book that is the fifth revelation given to humanity. So the Bible is not the revelation, it is actually in this book. This book is the fifth revelation that the Almighty living God and creator of all life and of universes has given to us humans on on earth, or Urantia. The fourth revelation came with Jesus. The third was done through Adam and Eve. The second revelation that was brought onto earth was done through Edentia, and the first revelation came through Caligastia. And all this will come later on, but the Father finds it for now more important that people get a more background about Jesus and his earth time. All right, again, thank you so much for listening, and God bless you.